What happened to the Hitler Youth after WW2? May 1945. Berlin is a graveyard of concrete and ash. And standing in the rubble, not hardened soldiers, not seasoned generals, but teenagers, some as young as 15, hollow-eyed, wearing oversized uniforms, holding weapons they barely knew how to fire. These weren't criminals, they weren't monsters. They were children. Children who had been handed flags before they could shave. Children who had been taught that dying for Adolf Hitler was the greatest honor a human being could achieve. And now the man they worshipped was dead in a bunker beneath their feet. The Reich was in flames around them, and nobody had told them what to do next. Millions of them. So what happened? What do you do with an entire generation, 8 million strong, who were raised from childhood to serve a regime that no longer existed? If you're new here, this channel, Timelines of War, digs into the forgotten corners of military history, the stories that don't make it into textbooks. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell right now, because this is exactly the kind of deep dive content we drop every week. Don't miss the next one. Now let's go back to the beginning. The making of a generation. When Adolf Hitler seized power in January 1933, the Hitler Youth was barely a footnote. It had fewer than 100,000 members. Most Germans had never heard of it. Within a decade, it would be the largest youth organization in human history. Under Reich youth leader Baldur von Schirach, the movement exploded. Boys as young as 10 were pulled into the Deutsches Jungvolk, where they learned marching drills, survival skills, and the unshakable belief that Germany was destined to rule the world. At 14, they graduated to the Hitler Jugend, the real thing, where the training turned harder, fiercer, and more militarized. Marksmanship, endurance runs, ideological drilling, obedience carved into muscle memory. Girls were not exempt. The Bund Deutscher Medal, the League of German Girls, channeled them toward a different kind of service, physical fitness, nursing, homemaking. But the message was the same: your life belongs to the state. In December 1936, membership became a civic duty under German law. By March 1939, it was compulsory. Every Aryan child between 10 and 18 was legally required to serve. This was not a club. This was a machine designed to replace individual thought with collective loyalty, and it worked with terrifying efficiency. Weekend hikes became indoctrination sessions. Campfire songs were nationalist anthems. School teachers were replaced with party-approved instructors. Parents who objected were reported, sometimes by their own children. A generation was being manufactured. From children to soldiers. When World War II ignited on September 1, 1939, the Hitler Youth didn't just support the war, it fed the war. Teenagers served as air raid messengers, tracked down fires in bombed-out city blocks, and manned anti-aircraft guns alongside grown men. By 1943, as German casualties on the Eastern Front became catastrophic, the pipeline from Hitler Youth to the Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS shortened dramatically. 17-year-olds were fighting on the Russian front. Then came the desperate final chapter. In 1944, with Allied forces closing in from both sides, an entire SS Panzer Division was built almost entirely out of Hitler Youth volunteers, boys born in 1926. The 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitler Jugend. At Normandy, these teenagers fought with a ferocity that stunned Allied commanders. They took horrific losses. They didn't retreat. They had been told retreat was cowardice. They believed it. In the last weeks of the war, children as young as 15 were handed Panzerfausts, anti-tank rockets, and sent into the rubble of Berlin to stop Soviet armor. Some were executed by SS officers for retreating. Others simply disappeared into the chaos. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, the Hitler Youth ceased to exist almost instantly. Flags were buried in backyards. Uniforms were burned or stuffed into attic walls. Membership pins were thrown into rivers. Millions of teenagers woke up the next morning with no identity, no purpose, and no one to tell them what their lives had even been for. The Allied reckoning. The Allied powers stared at occupied Germany and faced a problem unlike anything in modern history. On October 10, 1945, the Allied Control Council formally outlawed the Hitler Youth and banned all of its activities. Its property was seized. Its symbols were criminalized. Its leaders were hunted. Baldur von Schirach, the man who had spent over a decade shaping Germany's youth into loyal weapons of the Reich, was arrested, tried at Nuremberg, and in October 1946 sentenced to 20 years in prison for crimes against humanity. He had deported Jews from Vienna. He had poured ideology into the minds of millions of children. His successor, Arthur Axmann, went underground. He was caught in December 1945, tried by a German denazification court, and sentenced to just over 3 years, then released. He claimed he had broken with Nazism. But what about the 8 million ordinary members? Here's where history gets genuinely complicated. In the Western zones, controlled by the Americans, British, and French, the approach was re-education, not punishment. The logic was hard but practical. You cannot prosecute an entire generation of children for believing what they were forced to believe. Schools were reformed. New youth organizations were formed under church and civic leadership. Discussion groups replaced marching drills. Democracy was taught where obedience had been demanded. In the Soviet zone, the outcome was darker and far more ironic. The Freie Deutsche Jugend, the Free German Youth, was founded in 1946 and became the only state-approved youth organization in East Germany. Thousands of former Hitler Youth members joined it. The communist doctrine was new, but the structure, the uniforms, the absolute loyalty to the state, the punishment for dissent. Eerily familiar. Nazism had been replaced, totalitarianism had not. The silence that followed. By the early 1950s, West Germany was rebuilding at a speed that stunned the world. The Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, brought jobs, new homes, stability, and a desperate desire to move forward. Former Hitler Youth members, now in their 20s and 30s, slipped quietly into the fabric of the new republic. And here is the part that history books often skip over. Many of these men became teachers, judges, politicians, business leaders. Since membership had been mandatory after 1939, the stigma was blunted. You couldn't fire everyone. You couldn't imprison a generation. And so, by collective and largely unspoken agreement, an entire society chose to not look too closely at what had happened. The 1950s and 1960s became decades of deliberate forgetting. Classrooms avoided the subject. Families didn't speak of it at dinner. Former members told themselves they were just children following orders, and in many cases, that was true. But the silence calcified into something else, a refusal to examine the machinery that had captured them. Rare exceptions broke through. Journalist Alphonse Heck, who had been a passionate Hitler Youth member, wrote with brutal honesty about the pride he felt wearing that uniform and the lifelong guilt that followed when he understood what that pride had served. Historian Melita Mashman did the same. Their memoirs were deeply uncomfortable. They were also deeply necessary. The cracking of silence. In the late 1960s, a new generation came of age in West Germany, and they were angry. The children of former Hitler Youth members looked at their parents and asked the question that had been forbidden for 20 years. What did you do? It wasn't a comfortable conversation. Former members in their 40s found themselves defending choices they had made as 10-year-olds, choices they had never truly examined. Psychologists studying this generation found a consistent emotional pattern. Nostalgia knotted together with shame. Many admitted that the camaraderie of the Hitler Youth had been the most vivid, alive feeling of their youth. The adventure, the belonging, the sense of purpose. And then the horror of understanding what that belonging had been for. By the 1980s, German historians, filmmakers, and educators were finally confronting the question head-on. How does an entire society hand its children over to an ideology? How does a generation get captured so completely that even defeat, even revelation of atrocity, cannot immediately break the conditioning? The answer, documented in interview after interview, was gradual. It was incremental. It began with songs and camping trips and a sense of community. It ended with teenagers dying in rubble defending a dead man's dream. Section 6. The legacy that never fully dies. After German reunification in 1990, historians compared the Hitler Youth and the FDJ side by side, and the parallels were chilling. Different ideologies, identical architecture of control, uniforms, slogans, rituals, state loyalty above family loyalty, punishment for independent thought. The lesson was stark. The mechanism doesn't care what flag it flies. Today, the Hitler Youth is legally banned in Germany. Its symbols are criminalized under Section 86 of the German Criminal Code. Its records are studied in universities. Its methods are taught in courses on propaganda, radicalization, and the psychology of belonging. Museums in Washington, D.C. and Nuremberg display its artifacts, not to glorify, but to warn. Educators use it as a case study in how identity, peer pressure, ritual, and reward can transform ordinary children into instruments of ideology. The question they ask visitors is not historical, it's present tense. How easily could this happen again? The uniforms are gone. The Reich is dust. But the generation it created carried its scars for the rest of their lives, in the silence at dinner tables, in the nightmares they rarely described, in the way they flinched when asked what they believed as children. Indoctrination does not end with defeat. It lives in the people it shaped. And the only answer, the only real defense, is exactly what the Hitler Youth was designed to destroy. The courage to think for yourself. Outgrow and call to action. That is the full, unfiltered story of what happened to the Hitler Youth after World War II. 8 million children, shaped into soldiers, left to rebuild a world they had been taught to conquer. If this video hit different for you, if it made you think, drop a comment below. Tell me what part shocked you most. I read every single
uniforms, carried rifles,
Subscribe to Timelines of War. Hit the bell. Share this with someone who loves real history, not the sanitized
May
version.
1945.
We'll see you in the next one.
Lie in ruins.